Good afternoon, Mr. Richards. We have a seat. We appreciate your appearance here today, and we're ready to hear your opening remarks.
I want to thank everyone. I know that this evidently is streaming YouTube or through the Supreme Court offices, and I recognize that. I believe in the Constitution of our United States, and I want to thank the President of the United States for his diligence in selecting our judges for the courts here today, which has a tremendous impact on our system of government. I want to thank the citizens of Iowa for standing behind me for all these years of my life to be able to give me the opportunity to be here for such an honorable commission that protects one of our branches of government. I want to thank my family and friends for supporting me and always encouraging me to seek judicial position and to provide judgment in my best manner possible. And I want to especially thank this committee and the commissioners that have been appointed through the governors of the years to make these important decisions for the state of Iowa. And I want to take a moment, because one of my beginnings was when Governor Ray was over here at the state capitol, and I had the opportunity to clerk up in an office in one of the domes. And I think his passing shows a lot if we looked at his history for the state of Iowa and the position that we're in today. I'm looking at my Bible, and it talks about love, which is 1 Corinthians 13. And I won't use this time to go through the elements of love, but I'm sure that in God we trust. Love is one of those greatest elements. But of love, there's three great things. One is faith, hope, and love. And the greatest is love. And that chapter talks about when you're as a child, you speak as a child. And as you grow, you see things more through a clouded window sometimes. And that's what I see. To put every fiber and being into one's life work, which we should not be judged on our works of life, but in trying to be that person of love and what's in a person's heart. You know, to being able to put together a life to make those critical decisions when you come up into that significant impact where an opinion is going to be written that will have enormous effects either in the terms of wealth or labor, machinery, or the 5 pillars of our economic system. And the judges that are put with that task can have a great impact. And they've had it here. And I think the Iowa Supreme Court, we have to hand it to them for sometimes taking a higher standard than what the federal Constitution provides. One of the honorable judges up in Waterloo asked me why I was applying for this position. And I indicated that there was a judge that I mentored with back. And I do not come from a university law school. I come from a college law school. And my direction initially was led there by Richard M. Nixon, being on that board. And I sat for countless hours with another director of my education there, Albert Lee Stevens, Jr. And he was appointed by John F. Kennedy as his first federal nominee to the courts. And his father was a territorial judge in the state of California before it was state. And some of those insights, some of those great lessons of life over 30 years of practice in my own case, has a bearing on how decisions are made, how they can be made, and what impact in the implementation of those laws. Because when those great opinions are written, unless the citizenry has great respect for the authors of those opinions, we are continued to have strife. Now, whether that be one of the opinions that is going to come out sometime, because a judge can only rule on what comes before them. And we've had those here in Iowa as the first to do things. Whether that will occur with this court, and I'm referring to the essence of life. And when life occurs, it's causing a great debate in this society. But there's other distractions out there. But this life and the principle of life cannot be overcome. We must protect it at all costs. But what kind of a justice can reach that position? Will it be a justice that stood on the floors of Parliament or in the House of Lords, the founders of some of our great democratic theories that have come down over the decades and centuries? You know, does it take somebody that studied the very books that Karl Marx wrote when he wrote his thesis on how to control a government and the people? You know, there's some scary things out there that if you believe and you were to look, and as I came down here today, I followed an Army van with the United States Army all the way across it. I created one of those videos for the Army, and I turned it over to the President of the United States. But there were some fearful things on the horizon, and one of it is this control from outside coming in. Now, in that same vein, here in Iowa, when we select judges, part of the agreement when we were broke off as a territory from the Wisconsin territory was they had the opportunity to pick our initial judges and justices. Now, how far back does that control reach? And what kind of a person and a background do you want? You know, I can see that one of your commissioners has stepped out. You know, I know his mother very well and his family. I've always tried to gain the respect of my family, my friends, the coaches, you know, the leaders, the educators. And I've gone through this back from my college and studying with Albert Lee Stevens Jr., who was the first judicial nominee, and he encouraged me to continue to seek to be a judge. Whether I achieve that today in this body, but at some point, somebody's going to have to write that opinion that bridges the differences and brings together a great population in this country, that people can move forward with all this without all this bickering. In my thesis work for my master's in political science and public policy was the chart of the rainbow, where at some point in time the colors of the rainbow would come around and they would meet, the red and the blue, and there would be a great merging. And that merging, on the other side of it, we will come out with a vision for this world that takes us forward. You know, you can go back through history of the great politicians and how they've tried to instill upon the people that it isn't any one of us, it's us collectively. But what type of a person do you want to move forward here at this moment in time to the Iowa Supreme Court? I suggested as myself. I have those credentials. I've always kept close to my heart. And if one thing comes about a writing, I'll point to my thesis on biomass energy, that you can put yourself into a room in a library and put your thought to it over a period of time, in that case, nearly a year, and come out on the other side with some theory and thesis that is acceptable to that particular community. In that case, it was biomass energy. And then share that around the world. And then work your way up there and be able to represent people like the people of Papua. And you may not want to hear this, but those people are important to me. You know, of course, I look at it from an economic view. They've offered me 3% of what they could get. They own the biggest gold mine in the world. The Americans come in there and give them 1%. And if they won't take that 1%, they bring an army in, and they buy an army. And if you look at the United Nations theories, every one of those persons that got close to giving the people of Papua more than their 1% share has ended up, you know, essentially poisoned. or eliminated. So when you face these critical issues, even the Supreme Court, you can go back to the decision that this court made where we lost 3 justices on the next retention vote. And the retention vote, I assume some people will ask me about here. But I feel strongly that the state of Iowa needs to have that message, that Iowa needs to be leader as we move forward into the future. And that one decision that's going to be written that may have that impact, that brings our culture to realize that life is short, God is long, and hopefully, we can get there and have a happy world, because I hope we can all get along. I enjoy my career here in Iowa, and I'm going to go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Richard, I need to ask the first question here. And we had a discussion in my office about a week ago about the age requirements in the Iowa Code. How can you ask this commission to send your name to the governor if you are not eligible under section 4614.1?
Well, that particular code section is a legislative rule, and I see no cases of first impression. So I turn back to the Iowa Supreme Court. The Iowa Supreme Court, in Article 5, Section 17 and 18, talks about the judges of the Supreme Court. And that indicates there has to be an 8-year tenure, and the legislature can make qualifications, and the legislature can set a retirement age. Looking back in '62, maybe it made practical sense. So if you look at the Constitution, I'm eligible to serve an 8-year tenure.
Okay, have you brought any action or anything to support your position? Because I read the Constitution that says that the legislature gets to fix these matters about terms and about age requirements and about retirement. And I think the legislature has done that in Chapter 46.
I would argue that it doesn't come in with the previews of the intent of the Constitution as amended in 1962. I think the legislature has overstepped their bounds in setting a qualification that says that we are going to keep this judiciary under the control of a younger generation, especially considering that 50 years ago, the life expectancies and some of those other issues probably were more prevalent. There is also the legislature fix that in terms of Judicial Qualification Commission, where the certain judges could be removed if their age and health would cause them where they couldn't serve. And my plea to this commission is to look past that and to bring an action. I believe I would have to be discriminated against on the basis of that in order to have a legal challenge, to have to be refused by this group based on age. And the fact that you bring up age in this issue makes me want to believe that it is a primary issue if it is with the leader of the commission. Because I'm asking, the first question is this man or this woman qualified to serve as a justice? And by putting that issue into play, I think the legislature, in order to satisfy you, Justice Wiggins, is going to have to correct their law. Now, whether or not I'm able to force that action, it isn't clear at this point. But the qualification does not seem to meet standards of the United States Constitution, which the Iowa Constitution is founded on.
Okay. Well, let's go around and see if there's any questions. Mrs. Pearson? Ms. Bowden? Mr. Berger? Mr. Diaz? Dr. Taylor?
Well, I'll go on the record and say I don't care how old you are, but I would like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on the division of the 3 branches, especially from some of your opening comments, and you seem very politically charged to me, and so I guess I'd like to hear a little bit of your philosophy about adjudication and division of the 3 branches.
The broader stroke of that would be is I believe, even with this age thing, that our legislature and our executives are diluting the judiciary. in Iowa here. It's with all these mundane little tidbits of law that the legislature puts on our courts rather than allowing our courts to have deeper judicial thinking of the impact that'll be on society by the rulings. I would quote 1962, Robertson v. the State of California, which the United States Supreme Court ruled that it's cruel and unusual punishment to put somebody in jail for being an addict. Now, what our system does at that point is we put them in jail because they possess the substance or the whatever's supposed to make them an addict. And so we've diverted that. If the courts would get back and stand up stronger against some of these inadequacies, I think we're better off in judicial administration. It's like the Iowa legislature putting out a 70 several page long grid chart to when you got to give a $5 dare fee, when you got to put a $125 a surcharge, or why you got to have a surcharge at all. It's just a fine. By doing all those chopping up, we're going to go from, we've gone 2 law books in my career to 6, and we'll probably end up with 40 like most states before we know it. So that a judicial administration is being pushed on the judiciary without the funding to do it. One way around that, Justice Wiggins, I'm not going to speak his position, but if he thinks the judges should be retired at a younger age, let's say 62, they could all retire. We have a whole new set of senior judges that could do a lot of the work. Our rural counties are missing judges because the legislature won't get them. Lots of things that are standstill because we're always waiting for a judge. And then when the judge gets there, they rotate him in and out. So it's very difficult sometimes to be able to predict how you're going to deal with your citizen. And if I point back to the addict issue, which is a great dilemma in our small towns, whether in the mental health system, that this new assessment program, is back on the judges. So the answer there is the legislature is weakening the judiciary by being overpowering on some of the obligations put on our judges.
Mr. Bevel?
No questions.
Mrs. Sinclair?
No question.
Ms. Diekma?
No question.
Mr. Sukup?
You mentioned on the biomass energy, what was the feedstock you're using on that project?
Well, at the time, it was a new program in the academic world for studying agricultural law, trying to get it as a discipline. And so the advisor that I had, I brought it down to food safety and biomass energy and tried to elevate the biomass field with the government help so that it would help, in my mind, Iowa farmers. And so it was more of a study about how it came about and what seed money was provided by the government to initiate that. And then a lot of it's tied into economics. It was labeled for pollution control because at the time we believed that selling it as an alternative to get carbon energies down, that it should be able to take off. So that was the year-long thesis, to put together a first impression account of what was going in the biomass energy and then focusing on the next 20 years to try to get as much ethanol into our fuels as possible. The downside is some of the chemists and scientists still believe that you're creating a bigger factor of carbon monoxide into the atmosphere than if you weren't using it. But those are more technical studies.
Thank you.
Mr. Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Richards, so that I can better understand your candidacy and you and what you would be like on the Supreme Court, can you tell me 1 or 2 or 3 justices that have formerly served or currently served on the Supreme Court of Iowa that you would emulate and be most closely compared to?
On the Iowa Supreme Court?
Yes, sir.
Well, personally, I'll say Justice Wiggins. I have indicated that I'm real proud of the way some of our recent decisions are written. And, going from there, I would probably enter it without any direct comment on any particular justice, because in bouncing around an issue, having served on many committees, you know, I don't want to prejudge or say anything about which I would be inclined more to view with. I think it's throwing all the rocks on the table and sorting them out so that we come out with an end result that helps move our culture in a direction, you know, of however it be, whatever religion you are, but you know, everybody's fiber and being moving in the same direction. And the justices, they would all have to be given great respect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Bloom?
No, thank you.
Mr. Con, Mrs. Roberts? Mr. O'Brien? Mr. Gray?
Yeah, I do, Your Honor. Mr. Richards, I see that you donate almost 150 hours a year to pro bono work. Do you think the Supreme Court should encourage more lawyers to do more pro bono work?
Yes. I also think the courts, the judges themselves should be doing more. I know the justices are given 10 days of administrative time, which includes talks and lectures. And I do the 150 as part of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And I enjoy doing that. I would probably have to say, though, when you look at some of the great philosophers of charity, it's probably the charity work where nobody knows you did it. They don't know you did it. You don't know who got the charity. You just go out there and do it. And hopefully the end results add up. Now, the Alliance Defending Freedom, which I really enjoy the group, and I've gone to their Blackstone Institute. One good advantage of that, and I speak to the attorneys that may be watching, is that by doing that, you know, once a year, and then once you get over 450 hours, you go to this gentleman, you know, takes you to a conference, all expenses paid, you know, so in a way there is something coming back for that 150 hours. But how do you encourage the attorneys? And it's just these small towns, and Justice Wiggins, I spoke a little bit with him when he was here. He congratulated me on the good service that we do in these small communities. And it's you know, people need the help. I even consider, I mean, I do right now doing court-appointed work for the mental health and the misdemeanor courts up in Tama County. Well, just so you know, that court-appointed fee is $60 an hour. All the studies that I've seen, the cost to run an adequate law office is $93 an hour. So every hour I work on some of these cases, in my view, you know, I'm digging a deeper 6-foot grave, which if I'm too old, I guess that's where this committee would prefer to have me. But in any event, I will continue my volunteer work with different organizations, and hopefully from the Eagles, Fraternal Order of Eagles, find a cure to child diabetes in terms of the Lincoln Highway, be able to put in that great national trust where that highway is a historical monument to this country and Abraham Lincoln, where we bring east and west together and north and south.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions at all by the commission? Thank you very much, Mr. Richards, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
At